because we shot the film actually when did we shoot it? We started shooting in October 2009. So, you know, we were really starting to research the gear quite meticulously about 18 months ago. And things have moved on hugely since then, you know, I must add. But at that point, there were a number of different ways in which 3D was being touted in terms of how to make a 3D movie. You know, I mean, the obvious way, you know, the biggest distinction was between whether you shoot 3D or whether you just post-produce 3D. So it was, you know, whether or not you just dimensionalize it in post-production. Well, we weren't interested in that purely and simply at that point because it was prohibitively expensive. So we decided to go along the route, right, okay, we want to shoot this in 3D. Now, there were a number of different ways, and there still are a number of different ways in which you can do that. And it was you know, and everyone you talk to has a slightly different opinion, and it's largely down to really what kind of equipment they're trying to hawk. So we went up, you know, we ran up a number of different blind alleys, and we ended up quite by chance coming across a company called Off Hollywood in New York, who kind of babysat us through the process and said, well, this is, you know, this is how you need to do it. So, you know, one of the first things that they said, the one thing that you absolutely need is a stereographer, because, you know, you talk to some people and they say, do you need a stereographer? Do you not need a stereographer? Well, you absolutely need a stereographer, because they are the person on set who are responsible for the 3D element. And if it's not recorded properly, if it's not shot properly, you really are opening yourself up to a whole world of pain. So, you know, that was the first step. Was okay. These guys are supplying us the gear. We found a guy called Keith Collier. He was a stereographer, and then we looked at a number of different rigs which were available. And again, there was a kind of there was a split in there are two kinds of rigs that you could get. There were the side-by-side rigs, where the two cameras are literally side-by-side, and then there was the beam splitter rigs where one camera looks down through a mirror and is configured that way. We soon discovered that actually there's an inherent flaw in the side-by-side method, is that, you know, your point of convergence is limited physically by the fact that the lenses will butt together when they're on that, when you're basically you've got two fields of two adjustments that you can make. It's the interlocular distance, which is the distance between the two lenses, which is effectively mimicking the distance, or the perceived distance between your eyes, and then the point of convergence, which is where the two images converge. Now, your point of convergence is actually limited on a side-by-side rig by how close you can get those two lenses together. So it meant that you couldn't actually converge on anything that was near to the camera. You know, you had a physical limit to the point of convergence with the side-by-side rig. So then we decided, okay, we'll go through the beam splitter rig, because you can literally align the two lenses so that they appear to be right on top of each other. So you had that adjustment. So yeah, and then that's how we decided, and then we found a rig by a company called Element Technica, which is two red rigs, and it was a prototype, and we shot with that.
So you're really up in the prototype area, but as you say, that was 3 years ago it started, so you can almost write the book about what you do then and how you take that forward. Can you just say a bit about this relationship with the stereographer? Because you said you appreciated this is absolutely crucial. At a human level, two people understanding what you're trying to communicate. Is there anything to be learnt about that? Because
oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing is about stereographer, I mean, it is, you know, as a role, it is a technical role, but you've got to think of them in the same way as you think of a cinematographer. You know, a cinematographer, in one element of a cinematographer's job is technical, and they're responsible for the technicalities of recording an image. Whether it's on film or whether it's on tape, but their skill and their value is way beyond just that technical. The technical. It's creative, it's conceptual, etc., etc. And so is the role of a stereographer. A good stereographer will help you on a conceptual and philosophical level map out how you're going to use the 3D to tell your story. And you know, it's a relationship that really can't be underestimated.
So, off Hollywood is pretty important in terms of a bit of advice, mentoring. Yes?
Yeah, well, they kind of, you know, because we were at the cutting edge, and we kind of called it the bleeding edge of technology, really, because, I mean, we shot the main body of the film on this red rig, but we also had a smaller rig, which is it was an SI2K rig, which allowed us to put this thing on a Steadicam, because it was much, much smaller. And, you know, you had all the inherent bugs that you have working with prototypes, and Off Hollywood were fantastic because they gave us all the technical support and all the technical backup that we needed. So when we hit you know, when we hit an obstacle or we hit a bug, you know, that could be solved quickly, and then we could move on. And although, you know, 3D has moved on considerably since, you know, in a year really since we shot the film, I mean, it's still in its infancy. So, you know, you need to have somebody involved in your film who really does understand the technicalities of the thing that you're shooting it on, because it can go horribly wrong quite quickly.
Do you want to say a bit about post-producing in 3D, or your experience post-producing in 3D?
I mean, I had a really good experience. I did it all at Molyneux, who are a London-based facility, and they were very good. The offline process was a bit of an ordeal, again, because we were using very young software. We were using this thing called Cineform, which you use in conjunction with Final Cut Pro. And what it allows you to do, it allows you to be able to switch between 2D and 3D whenever you want to, basically. So you can edit in 3D, flick to 2D, flick back to 3D. It's in principle and in theory, it's a really good system. In practice, it's a nightmare because it's full of bugs, and also because we were combining information shot both on the red and the SI2K, trying to get it to work on work on sequences where you had both. You had images recorded in both different formats was a nightmare, and it actually put our editing schedule back probably by about 6 or 7 weeks, having to deal with that. So that was a bit of a nightmare.
Would you say, I mean, there was obviously a learning curve for you. Was there maybe a bit of a learning curve for Molyneux?
Yeah, I mean, Molyneux, I mean, they'd be the first to admit that you know, there was a huge learning curve for them. They managed it very well. I mean, but the actual issue with Cineform is more actually to do with Cineform themselves rather than Molyneux. It's just, you know, they're a small company who are experiencing a great demand for their product, but they don't have, well, they didn't at that point really have the resources available to problem solve at the rate, you know, at the speed that we needed them to problem solve. But again, I think that's probably something which has moved on in the years since we started editing.
Can we come to issues of screening? A little bit earlier when we met, you said you're obsessive about quality, and is that in part about issues of screening?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest issue I see for 3D at the moment is, you know, screening, because there are certain issues which have to, you know, the conditions under which you screen have to be, in my mind, a lot more critical, i.e. it has to be dark, it has to be almost pitch black, because the moment you start becoming aware of your surroundings, the more aware you are of the fact that the images are working in 3D but working on the screen. You don't really want to be aware of the edges. By being, you know, in a pitch black environment, you're less aware of anything else apart from what you're seeing. There's also issues of edge violations. It's critical that the image is never cropped when it's being projected, because what happens is when you're recording, you know, when you're shooting with 2 eyes, like for instance, if I'm shooting this glass here and I'm looking at it from 2 eyes here, the cut-off point on the edge of frames are slightly different on each eye. Now, when you combine those two, what happens is that you get a ghosting along the edge of the screen, which is really, really off-putting. So part of the post process is that you crop each individual eye so that they match. and then that's committed to your DCP. So you're providing, your image is providing that hard edge, that hard, clean edge. Now, if in a cinema, if they haven't got the cropping right, literally if they crop in on it, by cropping in on the image is that they create that edge violation again, so then you have that ghosting. It's also the issue that many projectors that are being used in cinemas aren't bright enough, so the image is dim. So it's a bit of a nightmare at the moment, and whether that will be resolved or not, I don't know. So